As we called out before, there are a number of data types in Python that are all sequences. Strings are sequences of characters and are immutable. Lists are sequences of elements of any type and are mutable. A third data type that's a sequence and also closely related to lists is the tuple. Tuples are sequences of elements of any type that are immutable. We write tuples in parentheses instead of square brackets. You might be wondering, why do we even need another sequence type? Weren't lists great? Yes, lists are great. They can hold any number of elements, and we can add, remove, and modify their contents as much as we want. But there are cases when we want to make sure an element in a certain position or index refers to one specific thing and won't change. In these situations, lists won't help us. Thanks for nothing, lists. In our example, we have a tuple that represents someone's full name. The first element of the tuple is the first name, the second element is the middle initial, and the third element is the last name. If we add another element somewhere in there, what would that element represent? It would just be confusing and our code wouldn't know what to do with it, and that's why modifying isn't allowed. In other words, when using tuples, the position of the elements inside the tuple have meaning. Tuples are used for lots of different things in Python. One common example is the return value of functions. When a function returns more than one value, it's actually returning a tuple. Remember the function to convert seconds to hours, minutes, and seconds that we saw a while back? Here it is to remind you. This function returns 3 values. In other words, it returns a tuple of 3 elements. Let's give it a try. We see the result as a tuple. What if we print it? We see that it has the 3 elements we expect it to have. And remember, since this is a tuple, the order matters. The first element represents the hours, the second one represents the minutes, and the third represents the seconds. One interesting thing we can do with tuples is unpack them. This means that we can turn a tuple of 3 elements into 3 separate variables. And because the order won't change, we know what those variables represent. Like this. So, now we've split the tuple into 3 separate values. We've seen before that we can also do this directly when calling the function without the intermediate result variable. In Python, it's really common to use tuples to represent data that has more than one value and that needs to be kept together. For example, you could use a tuple to have a file name and its size, or you could store the name and email address of a person, or a date and time and the general health of a system at any point in time. Can you see how these different data types could help you automate some of your IT work? Pretty cool, right? Knowing when to use tuples and when to use lists can seem a little fuzzy at first, but don't worry, it'll get clearer as we tackle more examples.